Welcome back to Neuroconvergent Leadership, where we talk about effective communication in the STEM workplace. I'm Jeremy Doran. I help great engineers become great leaders. Have you ever tried to convey a complex idea and struggled with how to tell the story? That's what we're going to talk about today. We have a very special guest, Emily Schneider. Emily, welcome.
Hi, Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
We are happy to have you here. Can you explain to the audience a little bit more about what it is that you do?
Totally. I describe myself as a visual storyteller. So my magical knack is simplifying complex information using PowerPoint to help business leaders better articulate their stories, to make more impactful experiences for their audience, and in the end, to drive their audience to make the informed decision or to be aware of the information that they need.
Who are some typical clients of yours?
Yes. So I work in a variety of industries. I work with pharma, business intelligence, data, finance, technology. Really, I focus in with leaders who have a lot of information and data and kind of results or analytics to articulate their story, to help create processes and to, again, visualize the impact or the right focus in that story when it comes to infographic data design and content in general.
We talk about storytelling a lot on this podcast, and one reason why we do is because so many engineers and other technical people love to talk about data and they love to talk about facts, but there's so many studies that show how powerful a story is compared to facts. So it's great that you're doing this. And you just named a couple of industries that you work with. Do you focus on those because it's tougher to tell stories within those industries?
That's, you know what, I love the way you asked that, because I describe it as, yeah, I guess I do, because I like to create, I'm a strategic creative thinker. And so I love, yes, that their information is a little bit more difficult. It needs a little bit more strategy, design balance. And so I think you're right. I like the challenges of like, how do I solve this? And learning, I don't have to be the expert in what the data is, but understanding what the key things we're supposed to communicate, what the key takeaways are, how this aligns to the bigger story. So bringing it part of the story. So using facts to then build that emotional connection with visuals. That's awesome. Thank you for asking that.
Great. Happy to. What are some of the ways that you do that? If someone has a bunch of data and they're telling you what it means, how do you take that and create a visual image for it?
Yeah, so maybe it would be helpful if I step back and say how I, like, when I work with my clients and the way I get onboarded too, is that they kind of, I don't write stories. I don't write their presentations. They need to have some kind of outline or overall idea. Usually it comes in the form of slides or old slides that have been updated with new information, right? And they need to refine or focus in a little bit different on where that product is or what their key message needs to be overall based on their audience. So I'm more of I help refine the story and craft that. And what that means is that when my clients onboard me, that first meeting is literally them walking me through their deck so that they can verbalize, this is what this overall takeaway is, this is what the story is about, this is what the slide intention is, and this is the information we have, but this is where I want people to focus. I'm a very collaborative worker. That's part of my creative process. And so I will ask a lot of questions. I'll start sketching and trying to visualize how this should look, because data can come in, it comes in so differently, but how it needs to be shown, there's very different ways that will help, kind of tell the right story. And there's different visualizations. It could be data, it could be infographic, could be using icons and imagery to kind of create a story or a sequence. It doesn't always have to be charts. Even imagery can sometimes help to show, using like metaphoric images, right, to show differences, to compare and contrast stuff that then again, data can kind of be very simply articulated.
And are these generally being given to people within their own company or clients or venture capitalists?
Anywhere. Yeah, it could be anything. So I work from internal and external communications stories. I work to events. I work at, big keynote speakers. I'll work for sales pitches, investor decks, startups. The gamut kind of ranges, because however somebody needs a presentation and slides to support what they're saying so that they can become more credible, more trusted, right? Get their story across more simply to drive their results. The medium could be used in any way. And sometimes it's not necessarily a full presentation. Like I've had an investor that came back and said, we need a one pager. We need to send a leave behind. So we articulated that information into a simpler document using PowerPoint as the tool. It could be an email, but it needs to be designed. It needs to be created in that kind of format that it can be used in different places. What I love about PowerPoint as a creative is my clients can then go and update. So if we build a deck, let's say for quarterly updates, the next quarter, I would love to help my clients every quarter, but sometimes they just need to update a few numbers and the data changes and the visualization still works. And so that's why I love PowerPoint. It allows people to work along with me.
I recently saw a presentation that a person made in Canva, and I was very impressed by that as well. Do you ever use that?
I do not use Canva for presentation and for my design work. I use Canva for like my own marketing purposes. What I love about PowerPoint and why I focus in on that, and I don't usually work a lot in Google Slides either, is PowerPoint gives you the ability to manipulate and maintain consistencies across the board when it comes to creating masters and templates or just formatting. PowerPoint is the leader in that. Canva and Google Slides don't make it as easy, and you don't have as many manipulation options. They are beautiful for somebody who needs that or just wants help creating a beautiful presentation for sure. But from my standpoint, being more strategic and just making sure you're kind of, dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's, and really getting into the details, PowerPoint is the winner.
How important are those details? How important is consistency in, say, the background and or fonts or font sizes?
Well, I have three things that I always kind of preach, and one of them is consistency. Because consistency from a neuroscience standpoint, when we start to see things consistently, our brain starts to connect those dots, whether it's the way headlines are treated, the same fonts, being in the same place. Color can be associated with different things. I don't know if you're familiar, but one of my favorite data facts is that when things are visually designed, you're 65% more likely to retain information than when it's just copy and when it's not consistent. And so when you can utilize visuals, and that includes consistency with fonts, the way where placement of things are, again, how color is used, the style of photography or charts you want, all of these consistencies, again, link your story together, and they make it easier as a presenter and as a leader to really articulate and focus in on the key points. What I will also say though, and I was just listening to a really cool podcast last night about presentation design, but color, it's so great to create consistency or to group like-minded things or the same thing, let's say throughout the presentation. I'm talking about product A, it's always one color. Product B always shows up as another color. I use blocks, I use bullets, right? Any way you can kind of stream that color through very, again, intentionally and strategically. But color could also be used to change a subject. So like if you go from an all white slide and you have one key big point, or you're changing topics, or you're changing, you're kind of shifting your audience and you want them to get back in touch with where you're at, because we'll go on with our own stories. Color has such a power in that. And I was like, oh yeah, but it's so great to hear. So yeah, I think that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It sounds to me like the consistency is almost a shortcut for us so that we don't need to try and reinterpret things over and over again. It's speeding up how quickly we can absorb what's on that slide.
I think that's an awesome way to say it. Yes.
You get to use it now.
Yeah, I know. You're helping me articulate in such new ways. I love learning. Thank you.
Perfect. So let me ask you on the topic of color, similar to this color behind me, I always use kind of a burnt orange and gray are the two colors that I use. Do you have any thoughts on those?
Well, I think color is part of an expression of who you are or how you feel. I'm a very emotive person, and so I think color can help resonate and bring those energies or bring that forward. So color to me is sort of personal, but color has meaning. Each, like orange and gray, have their own meaning. They hold true to some principles. And so again, if you can align to that, I think there's always a reason for that story to come to life. So is there a reason why you always gravitate to those? Is there something about the burnt orange that makes you feel or do or think that you like?
Well, I just like it. I think it's subtle but different. I guess I think it's kind of soothing but not boring.
Yeah, I love it. I think burnt, and I like the burnt because I think that brings some of the calmness down. but orange is a very unique, it's kind of stand out as unique and different of a color. So it is kind of eye catching if you think about the way it's used in terms of when we're like caution or right, or how signs and information, or even I guess like the people that work on the street, they wear those lime and orange vests, right? It's something that seeks your attention, but it's very unique. So that's awesome.
So does it have a meaning?
I do know
Okay.
it means uniqueness. I know that it has this, agree with you, it has a lot of energy. It stands out. I think it's also its balance of like the red and the yellow has something to do with it. But I mean, I could look it up, but I don't have all color theory in mind, but I do know that orange is unique. And I think the burntness brings that calming energy down.
You talk about consistency of color and font. Was that right?
Yes.
And then also font sizes.
Mm-hmm.
From one presentation to another, how similar are the fonts and the sizes? Is it just that one presentation needs to have a certain consistency, or is there some ways that every presentation should be consistent?
Yeah. So when you're talking about trying to create your brand, and is that like, right, like trying to create a presence so that people know it's you, or you're talking about your products? I think that that's where color, those consistencies with color and fonts themselves are. When it comes to treatments or sizing and bold and using bold or those kind of things, I think that can vary based on the content, and it's also based on how the presentation is being delivered. So something that you are standing in front of a big room, right, in this big space, and you have these screens behind you, you probably don't need as much words on your slide. You need more imagery, and you can have really bold words. You can have data that actually animates and that kind of stuff, right? When you're sending something along, you might need more content in there. Ideally, right, the goal is to never have words. I feel like that's like the Apple set this, and Steve Jobs set this like bar of these dynamic presentations with very few words, right? They create a lot of emotion and you get their story, but that's not always the case. And so that's where I say then you can kind of move font sizes around, but it's within a presentation that it's really important to be consistent. But then you're going to kind of step back and say, from a brand, these are my fonts, this is my styling when I do headlines or call outs, this is, so I think you can create some synergies, but there's definitely room for flexibility. I always describe it as like, it's kind of like you have this rubber band and you're just going to stretch it out just a little, but you never want to snap it.
Got it. You stole the question I was going to ask, is how often do you use words on a slide?
I mean, to be honest, most of my clients all have words of some sort on every slide. Just, again, it depends on the presentation. It depends on what your story is, what you're doing, and what you're trying to articulate.
I try to use as few words as possible in my presentations. Often there will be a title, and I may have one or two, but normally I try to use images because I don't want anyone reading the slides. I want them listening to me. I just want to enhance it. So I don't know if there are any suggestions you have in terms of words versus pictures, when one's appropriate versus the other.
Yeah, I think there's a balance. Yes, I think less is more when it comes to words and copy. How much can you take away where your thoughts are not lost? If again, if you need to have this as something that you're not there, if you're trying to build sequence and you want somebody to remember things, words help. But think about, like, we don't remember bullets. We might remember like 2 words from there or a short phrase, and it might be important to have that on the slide. If you're talking about quarters and you're telling a story, or, I feel like brand acquisition is always happening and you're telling a timeline, you don't need a lot of words, but you might need logos with a date so that people are associated rather than just nothing on there. And so I think it's a balance of using your slides as the background music to what you're saying. They are the missing link for your story. So as you present, we live in such a attention-seeking economy. We're just used to seeing things, and our brains, again, we remember when we see things. It's okay to put words on a slide if they are something that you need people to remember. You want to make that impact. You want to drive home a point. We need to see those words. We need to understand what you're talking about. If we wander off, which we naturally, our brains will, you'll see something and you think about a million other things. Having those key phrases, those words, that color, an image, it can be anything. Once it can bring you back, it's really important.
And on the subject of attention span, how long should a person stay on one slide for? Are there rules for that?
There are rules of thumb. I'm going to be honest, I don't know the technicalities. The way I help my clients is I say you need to say like two to three things that's the key. What are your key takeaways? Those are the things you want to talk about on a slide. I'd rather see more slides that have different information than to be sitting on a slide for a really long time. But again, I think like you don't want to be clicking through something every second so people don't see it. So there is definitely some kind of, I'm sure, some timing cues, but my approach is more about what are we talking about on the slide? And if we're talking about 7 things, this is not one slide.
So almost like it's a paragraph. Don't put too much in one.
Right. I mean, not even. This is like, think about a newspaper article. We're talking about headlines and blurbs.
I recently was at a Disrupt HR presentation, and everyone had 5 minutes to present, and each slide lasted 15 seconds, and they had no control over the slides. So the slides were going to go every 15 seconds, so they really had to practice their timing because they couldn't take longer on one particular topic because the slide was going to change on them. But it was very interesting and unusual.
Yes. I mean, 15 seconds is like no time. That's crazy.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So it was a very fast-paced event.
Yeah. That's fun.
What are some other tips that listeners can use to help make their presentations better and more visually appealing?
I go back, and I know we kind of talked about them, but my 3 things are slide intention, or I guess designing your slides. So slide intention, text, and your visuals. And when you approach those, it's talking about simplicity, consistency, and intentionality. So what are the key points I want to take away? What are the treatments and things that I'm going to be using repeatedly, bringing that brand feeling expression in? And how am I going to be treating things? What are the visuals going to look like? How are my colors going to come to life? And if you can create simplicity, consistency, and be intentional with your choices, you really can make a difference in all your presentations.
When you talk about intention, you mean what you intend to convey from one slide?
Exactly.
Okay. And when you talk about treatments, can you just explain what you mean by treatment?
I think that's more like text. So how your headlines are treated, how your call outs are, what color things are, what's the font, are those consistent? Are bullet points really bullets? Do not have a lot, if that makes sense.
That does. When you are trying to create a story, you said that they typically already have a story. Do they ever come to you and when you listen to it, you think to yourself, that's not really a story? Do you help them create what the story is ever?
A little bit. My expertise is not in the content creation. I'll help, again, kind of guide them, or I have friends and partners, I would say, that can come in and kind of do a better job of that. But I do find that when you can visualize the story, it starts to kind of shift and merge and move along. And so sometimes some of those challenging points or things that don't feel connected, we're able to kind of help bring that together because you can start to see those missing links.
I know when I'm putting a PowerPoint together, I first start with just, here are all the things that I want to cover. And one of the difficult things for me is figuring out the order, because it can often go ABC or it could go ACB, and really refining it so that the sequence works and isn't jarring can sometimes be a challenge. Have you got any thoughts on that?
I would say think about it more of who your audience is, what you're communicating, and what you want them to think, feel, and know by the end of the story. I kind of preach this 4-step story process where you start with the end in mind. So you give people why they're there, what they're going to talk about, and then you then go to the beginning, and then you kind of, again, bring them on board, tell them what's new or where you're at. Then in the middle is where you're going to figure out your ABC, or again, based on your audience, based on what you want them to do at the end. And then at the end, you summarize it. So I think being mindful of what's in it for them, who you're talking to, and again, what you want them to know, think, and do at the end is really important.
Wonderful. Out of curiosity, how did you get into this line of work?
I just, to be honest, started recognizing the things that made me really happy when I was doing work. I've been a freelance designer for 5 years. I've always loved telling stories. And when I started realizing that presentations were just so fun for me, and I love helping somebody else feel more confident and be ready to present or talk about their product or their story or their business update, whatever that may be. And so when I get to do something that I love and then I get to help somebody else be really happy and shine brighter, it's a win-win. And so I realized the importance of it, and I niched myself in January, and it's been awesome.
Great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So sometimes I don't know what I don't know, so I will push this to you and say, what are some questions I should have asked but haven't thought of yet that would help the audience when making a presentation?
I think that one of them, like one of my biggest tips, I guess, is planning ahead, mapping things out. Like you said, I think that it's so important that to think about how things are going to come to life. Think about your audience, think about your delivery, and give yourself time to write it and refine it and really get to know it. Because when you are confident and you know your story is strong and your presentation is ready, that really comes across. And I think in business, it's communications and connecting with people. It's how we move forward, is how things are done. And so to create that trust, that credibility, that authenticity with your audience, it's really important to plan ahead and give yourself the time to write your story, build your presentation, rehearse it, get comfortable with it.
It's amazing to me how often people say they don't want to practice because they feel it's going to make it stilted. Mm-hmm. And it's the complete opposite. When I'm planning for a presentation, if I don't know it well enough, I have to go slide by slide and I cannot deviate. But if I know a presentation well enough that I can jump to any slide at any time, that's how I know that I've got the presentation down.
Yeah. And I bet your audience notices a difference too.
Yeah. When you're kind of dealing from a position of strength because you can go anywhere and it's going to be fine. Anyone can ask any question. Great. If you are dealing with a little bit of fear of, oh, I hope I don't lose my place, or I hope no one distracts me, that shows up.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. All right. What else should we know about presentations?
What else should we know about presentations? I think that there is so much power in visuals and how people respond. As restating 65% of information is more likely remembered when it's designed. Looking at your presentation and how you can add imagery or simplify things, bring color in, create some visual presence. Even in charts, can you colorize things? Are really important to help your audience follow along and be engaged.
One study that I've seen, a number of studies talk about how much more powerful stories are over facts. People remember stories about 12 to 20 times as much as they remember facts. And if you can combine that statistic with your statistic about visuals and how those are so much more powerful, the two things combined, telling a story and using intentional visuals, that's a home run of a presentation.
I mean, I use the analogy too. I have a 5-year-old daughter and she can't read, but she loves books, right? Because the power of a picture book and that connection and that understanding and seeing consistency and things are simple. She gets it. She understands what's happening. She knows the story. She knows where there's struggle. She knows where there's good. And in the end, she can usually tell me what happened in that story without ever reading a word. So that's the power of a great presentation. Yeah.
Fantastic. On the images, are there times when you should use actual pictures versus, drawings or cartoons versus memes? When is one good or another?
And none is good or better than the other. It really depends on who you are as a presenter, what your brand, what your story is, who your audience is. And they all kind of play different roles and have different, again, people respond differently. So photography can spark some emotion, but illustration feels fun. It can show something more that's in process than something that's hot. Photos seem more real, right? Things already happened. Illustrations can kind of be more future forward. Icons can be very simple to map things out to kind of help draw attention to things without taking away, where pictures can get really kind of complex, or especially if they start to get really small. But so I think everything kind of has its purpose. My suggestion is to always try and, again, create consistency. So if you pick a photo, try and pick photos for that whole presentation that feel like they're in the same style, shot from the same perspective. With stock, sometimes you can get stuff that feels really dated and modern. Like pick an approach and try and make that feel cohesive. It could be simple too, as like changing all your pictures to black and white will also help kind of neutralize that. Illustration styles, if they're all outlines, if they're all filled in, if they're multicolored, again, creating those kind of styling consistencies really do make a big difference.
Wonderful. This has been great, But in the interest of time, we need to start wrapping up. So I'm going to ask you my 3 questions. Where is a place you have been and loved, and where is a place you have not yet been and want to go?
So I would say that I love Costa Rica. I love the rainforest, living in the bungalows, and just like waking up and hearing the birds. I went during mating season, so the forced nap with hearing all of nature was so amazing. A place on my bucket list is definitely just getting up to Canada. I think, and in the fall, we talked about what season it is. As fall approaches, I look really forward to one day visiting Canada in the fall.
You're so close to Canada. You've never been there?
I know, right? I haven't been to a lot of. There's a lot. The world's big. There's a lot of places to go.
The world is big. Even this country's big. The second question is, who do you think is a great communicator?
I would say, I know she's not famous, but my friend Jess Sherman always has a way to take my thoughts, or when I will ramble on and articulate it and just create the right words and the right little, she kind of turns my paragraphs into really great bullets in life. And so she is an amazing communicator for sure.
She's your boiler downer.
Yeah, she sure is.
Nice. And then the final question is, what is one piece of communication advice that we can all benefit from?
I think I kind of mentioned it before, but I'll reiterate, is giving yourself time to plan ahead so that you can be intentional with your story and how you build that presentation.
Fantastic. Even when it's not a formal presentation, I think that's a good idea. Just stopping and thinking about what you want out of a given conversation before jumping into it, that really helps.
Yeah. Awesome.
Tell us how people can find you to learn more about you and or use your services.
Totally. So my website is the best place to visit me. I am emilyschneider.com. You can learn more about me, my experience, see some examples of my work, but I'm also active and always open to networking and connecting on LinkedIn as well.
Perfect. I will put that in the show notes so people can find you. Emily, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you so much for listening to Neuroconversant Leadership. If you found this beneficial, can you do me one small favor? It'll be quick, I promise. Can you go and give this podcast a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever it is that you listen before doing anything else? Unless you're driving. If you're driving, then I need you to keep driving. And then when you're done and parked, then go ahead and give me a review. Hopefully 5 stars, but whatever you are comfortable honestly giving. Thank you and have a great day.